Imagine that you work as a secretary for an executive for 9 long years, and when you decide to resign to focus on building a family, your boss realizes how much you're missed. So the man becomes determined to win you over and make you stay, whether it's romantically by becoming his partner or just a work colleague. Either way, he just wants you to work for him, and for that, he's even willing to marry you. Will the man's attempts to win you over make you stay in your job, or will it work and you'll become a couple? I'm Nina, and in today's recap we'll be watching What's Wrong with Secretary Kim. The story opens with Miso, better known as Secretary Kim, who everyone recognizes as such because she works for a vice president of a company. The man is very famous, successful, and handsome. We see Miso doing her job every day for 9 years, waking up at 5 a.m., preparing the vice president's clothes and accompanying him on all his tasks, in and out of the office, being a loyal right-hand man to her boss and, as a result, not having a personal life as successful as her work. Young Jun is known for being a very objective executive who doesn't give his employees second chances. The man also sometimes uses the method of humiliating and repressing, believing that this is the best way for a person to learn, but it was only Miso who made this way of the vice president a daily fuel for improvement. One evening, Secretary Kim decided to tell her boss, after an event, that he should find her another secretary, as she intended to leave the company soon. The conversation went very smoothly, Miso knowing how to bring up a subject that would be difficult to have in a very pleasant tone, and Young Jun just accepted it at first. However, as soon as he got home, the vice president couldn't sleep properly, and this subject would terrify him for a long time. The next day, the news has already spread around the company and CRA wants to apply to take Secretary Kim's place. She's an employee who works in the vice president's office and thinks she's one of the best people for the role. However, I don't think she has any idea that Miso works every day, and when I say every day, I mean weekends and the night shift too. Young Jun decides for the first time in a long time that he's not going to have lunch with his secretary Kim and goes to his friend President Park to talk about it and maybe get some advice on how to get Miso to stay with the company. Yusik believes that it's the 9-year crisis. The man talks about the crises in a relationship, which are 3, 6, and 9 years. However, this theory applies to married couples, but he thinks there could be an exception and he could fit into this situation, since his wife spends most of her time with the vice president. President Park experienced the crises with his ex-wife, and when it reached 9 years, they ended up separating. Young Jun understood what his friend was trying to tell him and is looking for a solution if this is the problem. The vice president calls her to go to his house for lunch, and when they arrive, Young Jun tells her that he doesn't give second chances, but that he'll make an exception for her. The man offers Miso the position of director, says he'll buy her a house with his personal money, that he'll pay off the debts in her family, and before Secretary Kim can say anything, the man's parents interrupt them and call them to lunch. Later, when Miso is alone with his mother, the woman says that she would like her son to meet someone like Secretary Kim. She even wants it to be herself, and this makes Miso feel a little embarrassed. As they leave, Secretary Kim tells Young Jun that she still wants to leave the company, even after the great offer she received, and the vice president can't believe it. He was convinced that this would make her stay. In the next scene we see Miso with her sisters. The woman has helped a lot with their studies, and it seems that Miso is always solving her family's problems, like the girl's father who owed money to loan sharks. To solve this case, Secretary Kim sold her car, which she had won from the vice president for being 10 minutes late for the bus, and paid off the debt. Miso has a pollen allergy, and it's a really bad one, where you sneeze all the time and your eyes water. With this information, we move on to the next scene, where Young Jun once again goes to President Park to talk, since the solution he had found didn't solve his problem. Yusik thinks that his secretary, Kim, might be taking a liking to his friend and, for the vice president, this might make sense. He starts to think that Miso was upset the night she resigned because she had to buy flowers for the man to give to another woman. However, as we learned earlier, Secretary Kim's eyes were teary because of her allergy. Miso tells her sisters that she has the feeling that if she doesn't leave the company right now, she thinks she'll stay there forever. Their conversation is interrupted when Secretary Kim receives a call from the vice president asking her to come to the company. As she's getting ready to leave, the woman comes across a spider and starts to have a panic attack. Miso has a phobia of spiders. As soon as she arrives at the appointed place, Secretary Kim gets into the car in which Young Jun is waiting for her, and inside the vehicle her pollen allergy kicks in, as the vice president presents her with a bouquet of flowers. The man gives Miso half a day off to rest and discovers that her biggest motivation for leaving the company is to find her own life. When asked what that means, the woman replies that she doesn't want to be anyone's secretary or a member of anyone's family, just Miso's life. This keeps Young Jun awake at night. The man doesn't understand how she can say that the time they spent together wasn't part of her life. The next day, Miso is able to sleep a little more, and when she goes to the company to interview a candidate to take her place, the vice president and she start arguing indirectly, throwing things like, "You have to know that when you come in, you'll let your identity be erased and you'll simply become a secretary," into the air. In the end, Young Jun decided to hire the woman and asked Miso to make her a copy of himself. Before leaving, the man asked her what it meant to find her own life, and Secretary Kim explained that for the past 9 years she's just been working tirelessly and now she just wants to find some time for herself. Then she intends to find someone, date and get married, bearing in mind that she's already 29. In the evening at her home, Miso prepared an instruction manual for her new secretary and added a message for her to remember to take time for herself. Later, the vice president shows up at her house and asks her to marry him, so that she can get married the way she wants to and continue doing her job the way he wants her to. Miso refuses the proposal, and Young Jun believes that she may have had this reaction because she was expecting something more elaborate, so the man sets to work on it. The next day, Secretary Kim starts training the woman who will replace her. Her name is Ga. Miso explains to her all the schedules that the woman will have to memorize and that it is of the utmost importance that she records that the vice president must not have cable ties near him. Secretary Kim is dismissed early that day because the vice president has no other commitments, so he goes to have his meal with President Park. And the man advises his friend on the decision he's made to ask his wife to marry him, saying that it's like when you want to buy a company, you have to conquer it. And the first step is to start dating, not jumping straight into marriage. In the evening, Miso meets the office staff at a restaurant to drink and celebrate Ga joining the company. It's not such a formal dinner, since the vice president isn't there. But not for long, as the man soon surprises everyone by turning up. Of course, it's not an establishment at the level Young Jun is used to, since when he orders a whiskey he discovers that only soju and beer are served in the place, but the man makes an effort to be there. Afterwards, the group goes to a cheap karaoke bar nearby, but that's too much for the vice president and he reserves the whole place for them to sing and have fun. Young Jun has started to make an effort to be more attentive and win Miso's heart, so he gets her some food and serves her drinks. During the singing, Sarah drank a lot and got a bit carried away, which led her to make a fool of herself in front of everyone. But even worse, it involved her boss. The woman couldn't control the envy she was feeling towards her new secretary, so she stood up and grabbed the microphone from her hand, then started mocking the way she was singing and saying things like, "What's missing for you to want me as your vice president secretary, since I'm better than Miso and Ga." To finish on a high note, when the men tried to get her to calm down, Sarah ended up letting go and falling into Young Jun's lap. That was the end of the team dinner, and the vice president took his secretary Kim home. Before Miso entered the house, he asked her if she had noticed how attentive the man had been today and that now Young Jun would do it every day. He would even let Secretary Kim date him. However, the woman refuses and says something the vice president thought he would never hear, that he's not her type. After entering the house, the man is still outside and starts texting her. Young Jun says she doesn't understand how there isn't something about him that makes her dislike him, given that the man is handsome, rich and so on. Miso is amazed at how narcissistic he can be, and at the same time as she receives messages from her boss, her sister sends her some asking her to send hearts from a game so that the woman can continue playing. Secretary Kim ends up expressing her feelings about how hard it was to serve him 24 hours a day, and the man says that he only gave her all this responsibility because Miso never denied him anything. The woman then says that she just wants an ordinary romance with an ordinary person and asks him if it wouldn't be impossible for him to live a romance, since he only admires himself. The messages that his sister sends come in the middle of the conversation, and Miso sends the hearts to stop her, but it turns out that they have been sent to the vice president. The next day at work, the man changes his attitude towards his secretary Kim and picks on her for every little mistake GA makes, since she's the one training the woman. And we see that when Young Jun calls the replacement secretary into his office, he tells her to pretend she's being trained to replace Miso. In the next scene, Secretary Kim is having dinner with some friends, and one of them comments that a friend of her husband's is interested after seeing a photo of Miso on social media, so her friend is in charge of arranging a blind date. They then receive a questionnaire, and if they agree to answer it, they will win a dish from the restaurant. We later see that only they received the questionnaire, because Young Jun is involved in it. The questions were about what they would like their first date with a man to be like, what they would like to do, what they would like to get as a present, and so on. The next day, the answers come in the form of events. President Park asks Miso to meet him at an amusement park, and when the woman arrives at the place, there is no one there but her, but suddenly the lights come on and the place seems to come alive. Who Secretary Kim ends up meeting there is Young Jun, and the two of them spend the night having fun on the rides. The part that Miso liked the most was the carousel, because when she was little she was never allowed to go on it because her parents didn't have enough money for their 3 daughters, so it was always the other 2 who went. The vice president ended up talking a bit about his older brother. When he was in 4th grade, Young Jun was the youngest in the class, because they moved him up a class because he was so smart, and that made the other kids want to beat him up. And according to the man, the worst with him was his older brother, who was also in the same class. Then the two of them went on a boat, and in the middle of the trip, the vice principal arranged for there to be a fireworks display, and Miso loved it. The man even became more humanized by taking off his coat and giving it to the woman. However, the charm wore off at the end of the night when Miso realized that he had only followed what she had written on the questionnaire, and despite his good intentions, it wasn't genuine. All the things that Secretary Kim had written down were fulfilled, only one of which was missing, which was to say goodbye to the person you've been on a date with a kiss on their doorstep, like a scene from a movie. Apparently, Young Jun was willing to do this, but Miso put the huge stuffed cow she had won in the middle of them and went home. It's only the next day that Secretary Kim notices that inside the little cow's purse there's a present with a beautiful necklace that the man bought for her. Miso puts it around her neck, and Young Jun admires her with the jewel throughout the day, but without her noticing. Today the blind date that her friend had set up for her will take place, and when the substitute secretary lets slip to the vice principal that the woman will be going on a date, the man goes to President Park to talk. Young Jun is perplexed as to how Secretary Kim had the nerve to wear the necklace he bought for her with another man, but at the same time the deputy director tries to reassure himself that the date he prepared for her was incredible, and that it won't live up to expectations. And that's more or less what happens. The man's manner makes her feel embarrassed, and the place he's chosen for the two of them to have dinner is too noisy and cramped. But sometimes a photo taken at the right moment can make things seem more than they really are, and this happens to Miso. When the man is cleaning something around his neck, a company employee takes a photo because she recognizes Secretary Kim and sends it to everyone in her department. The picture ends up reaching President Park, who shows it to Young Jun, causing the man to lose the confidence he had in his plan. Returning to the meeting, Miso asks the man to do some research into a case of children who went missing for a period in the 1990s, and he promises that he will do everything he can to find something. The meeting was really disastrous, but at the end of it, the man expresses his feelings of wanting to meet her again one day, and when he goes to reply, the woman notices that his tie is crooked, so out of habit, Secretary Kim ends up fixing it. At this point Young Jun arrives at the place and doesn't like the scene in front of him, so he hurries to end the meeting and acts like a jealous person. The next day, The vice president has a panic attack inside the company. The new secretary has put cable ties to organize the man's computer wires and hasn't remembered the advice she received on the first day. Secretary Kim didn't say it was the newcomer and took responsibility for the mistake, but as they left the room, she reminded the woman that she shouldn't use the object in any way around young Jun and had to have an even more serious conversation when she asked if the man hadn't overreacted. In the end, Miso says that it will be okay if GA lends her the book he got before the launch from his favorite writer. Things calm down and the company's athletic competition begins. Secretary Kim wins every category she's entered in, and once again the vice president is jealous to see her with her body attached to another man, no matter how necessary it is for the activity. When young Jun gets up, he hurts his ankle, and now there's a little gossip between us. It's not clear whether he really hurt it or did it to get Miso's attention, but either way it works, so the two of them go to his house before the end of the competitions to put ice on the injured part. At the house, the man doesn't want to take off his sock to apply the ice pack, but Secretary Kim still tries to take it off and ends up seeing that the man has a very deep scar. Young Jun quickly covers her up again and changes the subject to lighten the mood. The man comments on how close she came to her partner, whom she didn't even know, in the race, even though it was necessary for them to win, and the woman says that he couldn't complain, since he said he would only accept first place. Then, since Miso wasn't bothered by having someone so close to her, the vice president starts to get closer and closer and accidentally pulls her towards him. What did you think of these episodes? I hope you enjoyed the summary. Leave your suggestions in the comments and subscribe. If you liked the video, like it and share it to help me. Until next time.